Hi and welcome to Movies Suck. Today we're going to have a look at Bounding into Comics and a story about Bob Iger yet again and George Lucas. It says Bob Iger tried to get George Lucas to sign a non-disparagement clause. Because let's face it, Disney doesn't like it when you say things bad about them. They just can't stand it. At this point they're becoming a bit like OCP in RoboCop, where they seem to control everything. I mean, they would just happily buy your company, pay you off, do anything it takes to try and make them seem like the goody two-shoes who just make cartoons for children, which is what they used to be. That's certainly not what they are anymore. Right now, Disney are this vast conglomerate with little tentacles sticking into everything to do with film and toy sales and all sorts of other stuff. At the minute, they're like a virus, just spreading everywhere and destroying things. At least that's how it feels. It's certainly what happened to Star Wars. I'm sure George Lucas if he was dead, he'd be spinning in his grave, but he's not spinning in his grave. He's like probably standing in his living room, spinning in a circle, going, "Oh, what did they do with my baby?" And let's have a look at this. Bob Iger tried to get George Lucas to sign a non-disparagement clause. Disney CEO Bob Iger revealed he attempted to get George Lucas to sign a non-disparagement clause concerning Star Wars. In an excerpt from Iger's new book, The Ride of a Lifetime, Lessons Learned from 15 Years as CEO of the Walt Disney Company, courtesy of Reddit user Eggers Hope, Iger details how he tried to get Lucas to sign the clause. Iger begins by discussing how they convinced Lucas to attend the premiere of the movie despite him not wanting to. Even though he had issues with the film, I thought it was important for George to be at the Force Awakens premiere. He didn't want to come at first, but Kathy, with the help of George's now wife, Melody Hobson, convinced him it was the right thing to do. How on earth did they convince him that that was the right thing to do, unless it was in his contract or something and he had to go? Maybe he was thinking about breaking contract and saying, "No, I'm not going." And I don't blame him. I mean, they destroyed what he had worked so hard for. Admittedly, he damaged it a bit with the prequels, but the new films just completely destroyed everything. It must have been so hard for him to watch his characters just being thrown away willy-nilly and just virtually treated like rubbish. I imagine it wasn't fun. I wouldn't have wanted to go to that rubbish either, especially not to look like you're endorsing it. Must have been very hard for him. He then details how he tried to convince him to sign a non-disparagement clause. Among the last things we negotiated before the deal closed was a non-disparagement clause. I asked George to agree that he wouldn't publicly criticize any of the Star Wars films we made. When I brought it up with him, he said, "I'm going to be a big shareholder of the Walt Disney Company. Why would I disparage you or anything you do? You have to trust me." And I took him at his word. And what did George Lucas do? Well, not exactly what he said he would do, but trying to get him to sign a clause that says, "I won't say anything bad about your Star Wars movies," even though they threw everything he had worked so hard for away and threw the stories that he gave them in the rubbish and said, "Yeah, thanks, George, but we basically bought these so no one else would use the ideas of them, or so that you couldn't use these ideas for anything else. And then we threw it in the bin. It's out back. You can go see it if you want. Yeah, it's on fire." It's just, these people at Disney are just the most awful people. Most awful corporate evil people. They're like the kind of dodgy lawyers and things you see on programs. Those evil lawyers who commune with the devil. This is pretty much Disney lawyers and Disney Corporation right now. So obviously Lucas did not sign the agreement. He referred to Disney as white slavers in an interview with Variety back in 2015. So he sold Disney to white slavers. That's a pretty strong statement. As reported by Star Wars is Dumb, Tom Burge details how George Lucas' distaste for the Disney sequels in an episode of Toy Run Star Wars Action Figure Cast. Around the 125 mark of the podcast, Burge discusses a visit to Lucas Skywalker Ranch where he states, "I can tell you with 100% accuracy, because this came out of George Lucas's mouth, George was not a fan of what they did with the sequel." He adds, George, as it turns out, he wasn't too keen on what they did with the sequel up to this point. Burge continues, he said he didn't like what they did to the characters, and that came straight from George Lucas's mouth. Lucas would also backhandedly describe The Force Awakens, saying, "I think the fans are going to love it. It's very much the kind of movie they've been looking for. In a similar manner, he described Rian Johnson's The Last Jedi as beautifully made. Well, that's about all you could say about it, there wouldn't be. You certainly couldn't say, that was a good story. That was a really nice use of those characters. This was all extremely worthwhile. No, he had to say, it was beautifully made. That way he doesn't have to comment on how crappy the film was. All he's commenting on is how it kind of looked, how it was put together. Because nobody in their right mind would call The Last Jedi a good film. Even George Lucas couldn't bring himself to say it, and he's getting paid to do this sort of thing. I mean, if they pay me enough to say The Last Jedi is a good film, I might say it. But no, actually I wouldn't. There's no way I could even come to the idea and bring this out of my mouth. I don't think anybody could say quite that many nice things about Disney Star Wars. It's just a very, very sad state of affairs that even George Lucas couldn't stand what they did. Even after they paid him off to actually try and force him to agree to all these things. Even George Lucas has integrity and still says what he meant, even if he couldn't necessarily say it straight to their faces. Ah well. This is Movies Suck signing out. Let's hope Disney restarts Star Wars and we try and forget about these new series of